Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the City Farmers Branch Study Session. It is Tuesday, August 16, 2022. The time is 3 p.m. We will begin with A1, discuss regular agenda items. Councilmember Roman.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Councilmember Driscoll.
I'm good right now, thank you.
Councilmember Williams.
I'm good.
Councilmember Jackson.
Jackson. Thank you, Mayor.
That's what I said. Did I not say it right?
No.
Oh,
okay. I do have one question on the on item H3. So we are increasing the budgeted expense with this particular contract from $150,000 to $500,000, correct?
No. What is happening is this particular item is related to a vendor that performs sales tax collection for us. So what we're doing is creating an expenditure line item because when we initially entered into the contract, we presume that we would record the expense of paying the portion, a percentage of their compensation. We presume we would record that as a subtraction from the revenue account.
Right.
With the amount being as material as it was, we did some consultation and we note that the item is correctly recorded as an expenditure rather than a contra revenue account. So all we're doing here is making council aware and seeking approval to increase an expenditure line item that is consistent with the contract amount that was agreed to in February.
Okay.
Nothing is increasing, and this person only gets paid a portion of what we get cash in the bank.
And this amount is the amount that we've been billed to date, or we expect to be billed?
We have one bill from the company so far. We expect one more before the year end. So the amount that you see represented in the $500,000 is like an estimate of what that could be. But again, we're only paying a portion of the revenue that we receive after we receive it cash in bank. Right.
So the fee is 33% of any taxes. Now, this is a service that goes and finds past due taxes, or?
It's a service that goes to find, for instance, like if a business recently or otherwise relocated, that's a prime area, we will work with the business to select a handful of accounts that the business believes that could represent additional revenue to us. They will then go work with the comptroller's office to make sure that any sales tax that has been reported is allocated to our jurisdiction, which is where the business is located. So what we have is details, for instance, in their first quarter, where they help to put cash in bank of in excess of $500,000 as a result of their effort.
Okay. So is there a way to project the revenue that we would get from this particular?
Well, what we did is with the information, okay, this expenditure needs to be classified as a add to expense rather than a subtract from revenue. We made that tweak before we delivered the budget to you, so it's properly reflected in the 22-23 budget. It's just we're trying to correct that for the 21-22 year that we're in.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Thank you. No further questions, Mayor.
Councilmember Merritt.
Mayor, I don't have any at this time. Thank you.
One thing I'd like to just handle real quickly if we can. I know we're all tired of talking about it, but J2. If the consensus is, we can either put a moratorium with the identification of the inventory, which I knew existed, so thank you. Glad you were able to find that from long ago about the original intent that these groups were not going to be retroactively kind of penalized. But if you guys are all fine with just moving forward and want to do that instead of putting a moratorium and figuring that out and saying these ones are exempt because they either bought their home or this stump was in place prior to the ordinance being changed, then I would say we either need to come up with a date to figure out when we'd come back and ratify Chapter 56 to make that amendment, or we can just move on and not deal with it all and say no moratorium, and all 200-plus homes just need to come into compliance. So I'm just putting that out there. Would love to have this conversation here so that when we get to that point later tonight, it's just a quick and simple. We either make a decision or we just take it off the table and move on. Looking for anyone's thoughts.
So if I understand it correctly, and I may not, with this moratorium, if we've got the, I don't know, 280, whatever amount, then we would be going retroactively to find these people, tell them they've got to, if they've had a stump for 20 years or whatever, they've got to now deal with it?
They would only be fined if they didn't come into compliance with a certain amount of time, which is going out and recutting the stump down to 6 inches or less.
Right. I thought that in the previous council, going back about 2 years, this had been settled, that the city was not going to go after people retroactively.
So we did that. Then we had the Code Enforcement Task Force, which came back with
Correct.
a different recommendation, which said, no, everybody. And that's kind of where it rested. And then seeing that sparked, well, this was kind of the original intent. And so I just wanted to bring it up. You know, it's for this council to decide. We either just move forward, or we're going to have to come back in a certain amount of time and retroactively kind of fix that in Chapter 56.
Yeah. One point I would just like to make, I don't have any statistics, but it's my strong impression that a lot of the folks that have stumps, and I know of several of them in the city, they are, retired folks that cut these down years ago. And obviously, retired citizens are on a fixed income, and we talk about inflation and cost and things, and cost of, cutting down trees and stump removal is not getting any cheaper either. So that's just one concern I have, is going after people that, they think, well, this is all settled and done, and now, well, why is the city coming after me? I mean, I just think that's kind of a fair point. And I have discussed this with a few residents. But
Okay. Thank you.
I would just say from a staff perspective, it's difficult to have two different levels of maintenance expectations. It's hard for the public to decipher, was this here before or not? And I think the way the ordinance is written is they're 6 inches or they're not. And I think so if we want to change that, and we've provided that list of inventory that the code enforcement folks did, if you want to change the ordinance to make those exempt or grandfathered in, you would need to take action to do that. Well, I think technically what we're asking for tonight, we talked about a moratorium. We were going to go and actively pursue dead trees, particularly after the weather event, but we were going to have a moratorium on tree stumps, but we didn't really get a sense of what's the appropriate amount of time. And I think just in consultation with our legal team and our staff, we really wanted, is that 30 days? Is it 60 days? Is it 90 days? And during that time, we can continue talking about whether or not we want to grandfather these. I think it'd be our staff's recommendation to either do it or not do it, and not necessarily grandfather those. That may not be the will of council, but just it's difficult to reconcile that with the public if someone drives by and goes, well, how is that allowed? And I'm having to do mine. No, what was here before this date?
We have a lot of homes that are allowed to do things based on a certain date that others don't get to do. But
Mayor and Council, I might add, you have a resolution in your packet which will provide for the suspension of the enforcement of it. And so if you decide that you want to do that, we're going to need an ending date for that period while you review the ordinance.
well, we can either set a date, go for a review, talk about it some more, or if y'all feel otherwise, we can just cancel that and end it now. Councilmember Jackson.
Mayor, so just to make sure I'm clear, because this was all before my time, the prior council set a code that said everyone needs to comply with this new code, stumps down to 6 inches, right? That's the code we have in place today.
That was after the task force, which that was in response to when this was originally kind of enacted and decided upon by a previous council before that.
I understand some citizens may have some challenges or hardships in dealing with their stumps. I kind of tend to agree with City Manager Land about it's hard to decipher what's one residents can do versus another one. And the prior council did a lot of work on this, I'm sure. So I'm inclined to stay with the current code and require that everyone come into compliance.
Okay. Councilmember Merritt?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Is there the possibility in discussing this that we might give those that are on the list an extended period of time, or would we extend that to all stumps? And I think that's part of what's the discussion.
Yeah, correct.
All right.
Councilmember Roman?
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly see the problem that the moratorium would create, that there would be some inconsistencies and may create some outrage between neighbors if they're like, well, my neighbor can do this and I can. So I completely understand that. Now, whether we go back and change it or keep it the same, I'm totally open to having that conversation. But I certainly see that we could be setting ourselves up for some problems if we don't treat every resident equally.
Mr. Bonanno?
Hi there, how are you? Leo Bonanno, Deputy Director of Neighborhood Services. I just want to make sure it's understood what the moratorium does, because I'm hearing a little bit, I'm hearing some different things. There are two aspects to what we're about to do: the dead trees and the tree stumps, right? And everyone agreed from my position last time we were together that dead trees need to be addressed. So we're all on the same page there. It was the tree stumps that are kind of up for debate, it sounds like a little bit. So if you pass the moratorium tonight, all enforcement of tree stumps stops. The age of the stump, none of that is relevant. So if you just pick a date for that moratorium to expire, code enforcement will move forward with the dead tree issue. We will not address any stumps, period, until the moratorium expires. So the moratorium freezes the entire tree stump discussion in place. So we will not enforce anything until it expires. Now, depending on how much time you allot to this issue, for example, if you kick this can down the road 30 days or 60 days, code enforcement would most likely just let the moratorium expire, and then we will start enforcement the next day or the next week, whatever it is. If you kick the can down the road further, let's say into next year, it might be decided that the next council decide an issue like this. Well, then what we would do is wait for the moratorium to expire, and then I would come back and I would tell the new council members, whoever they may be, here's what we did last time. How would you like to proceed? Because this moratorium is ending now. So that I just want to make sure that that you all understand the moratorium does not take into account existing stumps, new stumps. It doesn't see any of that. We're either enforcing stumps or we're not. That's what the moratorium says. So I just wanted to be clear on that. And can I help answer any questions while I'm here?
I don't have any questions for you, Leo. You know this is my favorite topic. But I would be inclined to, I hate kicking cans down the street because that's just giving it to somebody else to have to deal with. And this particular issue seems to just keep coming back. But at the same time, I think with following our budget retreat and our discussions on the staffing issues that we already have, that maybe tree stumps are not a priority right now. Dead trees definitely are. And so I would be inclined to extend the moratorium through the end of this year at least, and let this be an issue that we address later. And in the meantime, take care of the multitude of other issues that your department is facing right now.
What we could do also, just so you're aware, is when we send out our letters for the dead trees, we can educate the public on the moratorium, that this topic is in the law, but a moratorium was signed and it expires on this day. So we're just letting you know that we might be back to discuss a stump in your yard. And you might find that some people will just get their letter and go, oh, heck, I'll take down the tree and get rid of the stump. Well, so I don't have to worry about it, you know. So we'll educate the public on a moratorium if one is put in place.
I think
So,
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant, and I think I would assume that most people would then just be like, fine, whatever, I'll take care of the darn stuff.
yeah, courtesy letters, which are the step before any official code action. They're just what they sound like, just courtesies. Some people do take action on them just to be done with it. And it works out nice for us because we get to check them off and move on, you know. So courtesy letters work well under circumstances like this,
Yeah.
so.
Well, I can just foresee, what did we say, we had 280?
Yeah, about that.
About 300 tree stumps right now. That seems for 5 people to address, that seems like a non-issue.
That would be a lot.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I could see that would all of a sudden become a big issue that ties up our code enforcement on something that is not as big a priority in the city with everything else that you guys are dealing with. So I think courtesy letters are fantastic. You know, you said the moratorium, I know it is kicking the can, but I don't look forward to having to revisit tree stumps, but I think that's probably, you know, time-wise and uses of our resources, that may be a better option right now.
So if we're going to do the moratorium, is there a time frame? Is it beginning of next year?
I say till the end of the year.
12/31.
Mm-hmm.
I'll recommend a date at J210. So, all right. We are moving on to A2, discuss the proposed fiscal year 2022-23 balanced budget.
Mayor, council, we had this is a follow-up to our discussion that we held during our budget retreat on the 9th and 10th. And what I am presenting to you today is details that there were several pieces of discussion right toward the end where there were multiple areas where council members had a desire to fund additional items. That totaled up about $1 million. And so what I'm going to present to you are a couple of options or pathways where this may work. The first place that popped into my mind is what you see represented here, and that is represented as option 1, where it presents an additional $400,000. You might remember that within the budget, within that appendix section where I showed you during the retreat, we, in the drafting of the budget, placed a placeholder of $4 million. In the week after we provided the budget, but before the retreat, we received a more concrete amount, so of $3.6 million, and so that represents a $400,000 additional item that could be freed up to take care of some of the additional projects that were mentioned. Additionally, we can think through and we are able to consider ways that the $3.6 million is split. So we took a look at what is the breakdown of where our staffing is. Now, of course, as we talked about during the retreat and some of the other financial updates that I've provided, the majority of our staffing, of our headcount, of our personnel does reside within the general fund. But there are 2 other funds where there are personnel. So what we did is we took that $3.6 million and we divided it pro rata based on where we have personnel. And what that did is that created between these two line items, the 242 and the 48,000, it created an additional 290,000 that could be considered with general fund. So instead of general fund having a line item for 3.6 million, it would have a line item for 3.3. Water sewer would have a line item, and so would hotel motel. So same 3.6, but we figured, an option for how we might spread that out. So that gets us roughly 70% of the way there in terms of figuring out a way to provide for that $1 million worth of details that we discussed. Let's move forward. So just to kind of recap, this is what, when I was doing the Waffle House order and taking details down for what items kind of made discussion, and we couldn't fully tell. Some were more unanimously considered, others had different levels of support among council, but I'm just listing them here for your discussion. So the MetroCrest services, that 230 is what appeared in the letter that was provided on the last day of the retreat. Public safety additional pay, so within the budget that was provided, there's a 7% increase in public safety pay, which is a little bit more than what our HR team did the work to figure out what market is, and that came in about 6.2. So 7% in the budget, but here are two pieces of information. I just provided a range if we were doing 1% additional or 5% additional. So up to about 549,000 is what that calcs out to be. There was some discussion as well about Sharrows and neighborhood investment, so $100,000 line item there. Neighborhood repair program, $100,000 there, and this also could, be combined with some existing funding within our budget already for the neighborhood partnership program, so that could make that money work harder and more efficiently by allocating an existing $50,000 that's already within the neighborhood partnership program. And then there was some discussion as well about the Farmers Branch Chamber of Commerce for $25,000. And I recall conversations about the method in which our partners that are classified within that way, some of those partners have specific metrics in terms of the way that they're funded, but there was a request for considering an additional $25,000 to the Farmers Branch Chamber. I tried to think of different relevant facts, and I'm here either now in this setting, if I can gather that information quickly, or in the future to provide any kind of facts that you might need to help you with your deliberation. But a couple of pieces of information that you might recall from the budget retreat: 1% change in public safety pay, $183,000, and that 1 cent on the tax rate. And I've rounded that number. I gave you a very specific number during the budget retreat, but I've rounded that number to $806,000. That same 1 cent to an average property, and remember during my slide I showed you how we come at that number because different people with different property values are going to experience different things. So based on our average value, that 1 cent equates to about $26. So up here I'm showing you a way to get $700,000 or so of the way there to the million. Down here is some additional funding sources that you might consider. Within our CIP budgets, there are two line items, one for monument signs for $100,000. We could forego that funding for this year, consider adding it back in during the upcoming year, but that's the line item that was included there. And then smart meters, you might recall during our budget retreat, our Public Works Director, Mark Bentley, presented information, and he talked about a $1.8 million amount that it would take to convert the remainder of residential smart meters. The amount that was held within the CIP budget was $3 million because it represented the additional amount between 1.8 and 3 million represented the amount that it might take to get some of the more larger meters in the commercial accounts also converted over as well. So what we would consider doing is reducing that number from the 3 million to 2.7 to create this additional $300,000 here. So, we put us in the game with, relatively the amount of funding that it would take to honor the additional request. I'm just including this here just to show you a pretty breakdown of our overall proposed budget for this year compared to our adopted budget from last year, and just kind of showing the movement within some of those classes and categories. So general fund being our big one, and that movement that is created because of the fact that our capital projects budget this year is significantly bigger as a percentage of the overall picture. So I was like, I like that. I'm putting it in. So in terms of what's next, this kind of concludes my prepared comments. What I want to do is listen to understand which of those requests there's a desire to fund, all or in part, or, et cetera. And then at what amounts, because some of them had options, et cetera. And if there are additional pieces of information that you need to assist with your review of the budget, facts, et cetera, I'm happy to do what I can to try to gather those. And I always try to end with what we have coming before us, just so that we can kind of keep our eye on the prize. So in our next council meeting, we will always have this time during study session to talk about what's going on with the upcoming year's budget, but also bear in mind that this new topic is coming in to talk about, and we'll provide you with how we want to amend this year's budget. So you should expect in your packet some information that kind of helps you it's going to be a lot, just like the budget is. I mean, it's basically an additional year of a budget that we're truing up. So you should expect that information to be forthcoming. And then during the council meeting, our budget public hearing as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or step back and allow that conversation so that we can get some direction on where we'd like to go.
Okay. Ms. Evans-Jones, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to dive in and find some of these amounts that we were looking for, that we wanted to deliberate on a little bit further. I'm going to switch it up and start to my right this time. So, Councilmember Merritt, any questions for Ms. Evans-Jones?
Thank you, Sherelle. Could you help me locate the smart meter funding?
Yes.
Is it in the CIP?
I'll show you. Yes, it's within CIP. Go to underneath the capital projects tab, and I'll tell you a page number. Give me just a second. Page 115. Under the 2022-2023 column, there's an amount of $3 million for water meter replacement. That's what that's referring to. So if the options that were presented here are amenable to the group, that number would change to 2.7. Are there other questions I can help with? Okay.
Do you want to, hold on, I was letting.
Okay.
He was.
That helps me for the moment. I will reserve my right.
Yep,
for
we'll come back
additional
around.
questions. Thank
We'll
you.
come back around. Councilmember Jackson.
So we may need Mark to help us a little bit here with this question as well. The smart meter project is to replace old analog meters with new digital meters that measure water much more accurately.
Correct.
And the general result has been water bills have gone up because the old meters are worn out. The new meters are measuring the proper amount of water, which is better than the old ones.
That is
right?
one of the side effects. One of the other factors that we have heard from other communities that have made the transition is that their residents appreciate being able to see their consumption on a more real-time basis.
Right, right. So part of this 3 million is commercial properties also? larger, more expensive meters?
Right.
Okay. And
So Mark's presentation included 1.8, that it would be necessary to convert the residential. So 1.2 of the 3 million would be to convert commercial meters as well, so that you have more of your city meters on that newer technology.
okay. And somebody help me remember, did we discuss this, or maybe I saw it in a previous council meeting, that we need to buy these meters this year to beat a price increase that was coming into effect? Do I recall that correctly?
Yeah, that might be more Mark.
Mark Bentley, Director of Public Works. Yes, sir. We currently have a contract with the meter supplier that expires in October, at the end of October. So if we move forward with this, then we would need to be ordering those meters in October, or there will be a 12% increase on the cost of those.
Okay. I think that's an important factor for council to be aware of, because if we decide, let's drop this, if we need to find more money, for example, and just focus on the residential meters, and so now we're down to 1.8, we freed up 1.2, we're looking at a 12% cost increase in the future. That's another $144,000 that we may have to pay next year under a different contract for these additional meters, or the year after. Am I thinking that through correctly?
Well, if you don't order them in October, let's say you decide to do it in May of next year, you're going to pay the 12% increase. It's not going to go into the next budget year. It's just the price of the meters are just going to go up after October. Okay. So anytime after October, we're going to be paying more money for the meters, period.
Okay.
I mean, it's
Or we could choose to not budget that for 22, 23, and budget it for 23, 24.
right, and then we just
Do
have
commercial,
to add more money to it to.
right, just add another
Correct.
144,000 for the extra 1.2
Correct, yes, sir.
million that we're going to spend now on commercial that we didn't do in this budget. That is a potential.
Yeah, the commercial meters are a totally different animal. I mean, we're talking every meter is $30,000 to $50,000 per meter. So that's why we weren't looking at this, in this program, we weren't looking at the commercial meters. We were only looking at residential and finishing out the residential package, because the drive here was to give the residents the ability to look at what their usage is and everything else. We're not looking at the commercial people, they don't really care.
Right.
The only thing we want to change on the commercial meters is because they are old, we can't find parts for them, so we want to upgrade them. And that's really the only driving force on changing out a commercial meter. It's not necessarily to get it on to the smart meter program or anything like that. It's just they're old and we need to get rid of them because we can't find parts.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just making sure that I'm clear.
Okay.
We could say, we're going to push the commercial meter replacement project another year down the road, and do that in the next budget.
Correct.
It's going to cost us an additional.
Well, along with this budget of the meters for the residential, we also have in our budget $200,000 for meter replacement of large meter replacements that we do every year. We take $200,000, we bid out 8 or 9, and then we pick all the ones that we can get within that $200,000 budget, and then we go do them. We do that every year consistently. We've been doing that for years and years now. So we will continue to do that on the larger meters. Now, it just takes longer to get there at $200,000 a pop. So, but we will continue to do that. So along with these residential meters, we're still going to take $200K and go fix some commercial meters next year. It's in our budget for that.
Okay.
We have 2 or 3 years ago, we increased it from 150 to 200,000, which gave us a little more room to do, probably one more meter. But
Okay.
and I think actually, that's probably the best scenario to move forward, is just continue doing the large meters that we can with the general fund budget that we
Couple
have.
100,000.
And then if we want to go and hit the residential with a large sum and just take care of all of them and get them done, I think that's a great program.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Williams.
Mark, before you go away, so because what we're actually discussing right now is reducing the 3 million by 300,000. So what kind of impact does that 300,000 have on the water meter replacement program?
Okay, based on what our estimates are, if we buy the meters in October, I went through that scenario with my presentation, was the fact that we were looking at roughly $1.8 million to finish 3,000 residential meters, which would then get them across the board, get all meters taken care of residentially, okay? Not the commercial, but residential. So at 1.8, 3 million, we got 1.2 excess. I mean, you could take $1 million and it's not going to hurt us.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Yes. Along this line, Mr. Bentley, what percentage of the large commercial meters have we replaced doing this on a extended annual basis? Just ballpark.
Ballpark, we are probably, I think we're approaching the midpoint. 50% of them have been done at this point. Don't hold me to that number.
So if you can, look into the future, your crystal ball. So if we continue with, say, 200 a year, about how long would it take us to replace all of the commercial meters? And is there more of an urgency to do that, speed it up?
Well, there's always going to be, with the larger meters, there's always going to be a little bit of an urgency, okay? In the aspects that you've got a meter in the ground that is old. And if it breaks, we don't have the parts, so we're going to have to replace it. So yes, there's an urgency to replace those commercial meters. And that's why we continually do that year in, year out. Would it be a good idea to use the whatever's left over, 1.2 to do more commercial? Yes, we could do that. And that would help us. But I'm just saying, if you're needing funds for some other reason or something, even if you left a portion in there, you took out 300,000 and you left us 2.7, we could still use that additional, whatever numbers are, you're the numbers person. But anyway, whatever we have left over after you take some funds out to make up for something else, we can still use those and do some more meters. We can do the larger ones. 900, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about that, and, I think as a goal for all of us on council, we want to have state-of-the-art facilities and amenities and equipment, for our employees, for our staff, for fire and police, et cetera. And I was just thinking, we want to have the best facilities and everything, but we've got these old meters, and there's a opportunity cost there. If, a big one goes out, and as you said, we can't get parts for it, that's a major problem for that business, a big problem.
It is.
Yeah.
If I recollect when I did this was a while ago when we first started talking about smart meters. The number that throws in my head is $5 million to fix everything.
That's residential and commercial?
That's residential. So we're still looking at roughly $2.5 million in commercial side to fix all of the commercial side.
And those costs won't go down either for the.
And those costs are not going
Right.
down, everything's
Right.
going up.
Yes,
So.
yes, okay.
But anyway, so it's going to be tough. We can do the residential, but it's going to be really tough to do the commercial too. It's just, now if we can take a chunk, $900,000 will go a whole lot further than $200,000, and we can get a really good jump on those and then go the 200 every year. Because if you think about it, we've got 200 already in there. We got 900. That's $1.1 million we can throw towards commercial.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Just wanted to consider kind of all the facets of this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Roman.
So Sherelle, I just have a question. Under request for additional funding, where you've listed out all the different priorities of different council members, for the neighborhood repair program, you said we could combine it with the $50,000. Is that in addition to the 100 that's already listed there?
Yes, so my comments mentioned that we could make that money work harder, and so that could be possibly 150, because there's an additional 50, there's an existing 50 that's already in the budget.
Okay. So I think if we're adding up all of the different sources that you've been able to kind of penny pinch and find additional revenue so that we can try and fulfill these requests for additional funding, what is the total amount that we're looking at?
The sum of everything listed there, I think, is $1,004,000, so right at $1 million,
Okay.
Of the list of everything within the additional funding. Is that your question?
No, so we've got option 1, option 2, and then additional funding sources, and and I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. It looks like option 1 and 2 are go here or go here.
Right.
And then whichever option you select under additional funding sources, then we would add either option 1 and 2 to those.
Okay.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that 690, I don't know where the cursor is, it's not cursoring, there it is. Okay, so 690 is a source of money, right? Additional funding sources, 790, one more 100 makes 790, 3 more 100 makes 1,090,000.
Okay.
So you said this, which is, about in the $1 million range, I'm trying to provide that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
One more.
Councilmember Jackson?
Back on the water meters for a moment. What happens if, let's say we take 1.2 out of the 3 million, and decide that we're going to only address the residential meters and whatever 200,000 will handle otherwise? And what happens if one of these big meters in a commercial property breaks? Where does the money come from to replace that with a new meter?
So as Mark Bentley's comments indicated, there's always an amount that's in the budget that enables their team to replace meters that are broken, et cetera. So they'll have some funding to be able to address some spot issues or what have you that's already existing within the budget.
So that's the additional $2 million in the target fund balance for water sewer?
No, I'm saying that already included in water, sewer, and fixed asset spending is an amount of $200,000 for large meter replacement. And we always have that in the event that we have items that are broken, or as Mark outlined, from a more detailed perspective, because that's, the area that he works in. But we always have that funding within the budget, and it's there now.
Okay. And let's say that business has a broken water meter. We don't have these meters readily available on the shelf, I would assume. We have to order it, buy it, come in. So in the meantime, as this business doesn't have running water, or what's the experience for the business?
Fortunately, I have not come up, since I've been here, I have not come up to an instance where a meter actually broke and they didn't have any service, and we got into that position.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. It might happen, but I haven't seen that happen. We've seen some that have faulted, but they still operated, and what that's doing is it's probably not registering properly and they're getting free water. But we try to get parts as soon as we can. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll go rob another meter for the parts we need. Now, we don't keep a lot of those meters in stock because they're very expensive.
Right.
So we keep the smaller meters for residential always constantly in stock, but we don't keep the larger meters. To go back to the question you just asked, Sherelle, the 200,000 that we have, as soon as we get it, we put a bid out and we spend every dime of it. So that 200,000 is not there. Where we go to get funds to pay for meters that break or anything else, we do take it out of the utility replacement.
Right.
CIP program. That's the only place we have to go get large sums, and we usually hold money back in that in order to fix emergencies that we need.
And you know which meters are most critical
We do.
to replace first, so you're working those due to a problem.
We are working those. We had 8 meters on that got bid this year, and we were able to do 4 of them.
Okay.
So we've got 4 more already identified for next year, and we'll probably add some more. And if they happen to come in where we can get 5, well, we'll do 5. But
Okay.
generally speaking, 4 to 5 is the most you're going to get out of the 200,000, depending on the size of the meter themselves.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Merritt, back around to you.
Certainly a lot to digest. Actually, I'm going to hold tight and see where the conversation goes. No further questions at the moment.
Councilmember Williams, anything? No. Councilmember Driscoll?
No, I'm kind of digesting this.
Yeah. Councilmember Roman?
While we're on the subject of the budget, I've had some conversations with some residents, just a few of them, because I didn't want to create a lot of upset neighbors in my district. But from the conversations that I've had with people, they've shared with me that other cities are lowering our tax rate, but we're not, and that caused some deep concern for them. And I try to explain the implications of SB2, but correct me if I'm wrong, I think all other municipalities are also subject to the same regulations of SB2. And so I kind of wanted to pause there and let you answer that question.
That is true. It impacts all of the organizations throughout the state. The thing that I was trying to caution against as we were talking during the budget retreat is just kind of looking at what one city is doing, because what we don't know, because we're not intimately familiar with what all pressures and funding sources and et cetera, it can be tempting to look at what another city is doing. But just in a couple of quick glances at some of our, cities around here that we tend to benchmark off, some of them propose to maintain their tax rate. Some of them propose to lower their tax rate. And a couple of quick glances, I was able to see some other areas where their fees were increasing. So it's tempting to compare, but you got to get the whole story, and it's difficult to do that if you're not within that city and intimately familiar with their financial setup.
Yeah. But the perception is out there, and sometimes perception becomes the reality. And so I just thought it'd be prudent of me just to make sure I address that. Then the other concern that was brought to my attention was that, so let me ask this, how did we end up in a position where the Water and Sewer Fund has excess funds to be able to reimburse residents?
The simple answer is, let's talk about the revenue piece first. The revenue for water and sewer, we have not increased that rate over the past 2 years, possibly 3, but let's go with 2 years. So that rate has remained the same. What is changing is the number of meters, the number of businesses, the number of residents that are within our city. We're growing. So there are more people paying the same rate as what was before. Let's drop down to the expenditure, the expense section. So one other factor is that there's a component of our bills that are largely contingent upon flow, water flow, sewer flow. So you know how I always show you that line item within water sewer operations, and it's huge. And so there's a component within that line item that is we pay more to Dallas Water Utility for the water based on flow. But there is a component within our expenditures that we have to pay for those services and those, the water and the sewer services. There's a component of it that is fixed. So what I'm walking you through is rates haven't changed, more people are in the city, so it's creating more revenue, and flow goes up because there is more people utilizing water, utilizing sewer, but there's also a component within our expenditures that to those two major entities that is fixed and doesn't increase if we get, you know, I'm using an extreme example, but if we get 20,000 more people within our community, that amount doesn't change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so one thing that you mentioned, you said some expenses have decreased, and then also we've had some, we've been collecting more money because there are more residents to collect from, right?
Half right.
Okay.
Correct on the revenue amount is increasing one year to the next because there are more people, but our expenses are also increasing. They're just not increasing at the same rate as the revenue. But again, we have not increased the rate that we would assess for water, sewer services, and even stormwater. Those items haven't increased in at least the past 2 years.
Okay. So it sounds like if we continue down the same path, we are going to be scheduled to have the same instance occur where we are overfunding our water and sewer fund if our expenses aren't increasing at the same amount and more residents are continuously moving in, apartments are being built, townhomes and condos are coming into the city.
Well, what I showed you during our budget retreat and what's included within your materials shows that the water sewer fund is, absent any other changes, et cetera, is projected pretty close at a break even. So we go through, we get the rates from Dallas Water Utility. You know, we have to confirm a certain amount of flow that we will take. And so what we're projecting now is pretty close to a break even. What we don't know when we're sitting here right now, crystal ball and what's going to happen in the future, what we don't know is what's going to change in terms of people in our community, the amount of consumption that they will have, those factors. We study it as best as we can, but that is largely contingent upon people's usage. The other thing I'll also say that is a factor is some years are wet and some years are very dry. Right now, we're in a very dry period, and so a very dry year compared to rainfall and other, I mean, Texas is always hot, right? And it's always dry compared to some places on the Northeast, but I'm saying we have details that kind of help us to understand rainfall, et cetera. And when you have a very dry season, as we've had this year in particular, you're gonna have more consumption because people, you know, are interested in having green lawns and a number of other reasons, but you're gonna have a spike in consumption. So those are also factors as well in what drives that. But what I'm showing, or what I've shown in the revenue and the expenditures related to water sewer is, I think it's like about a $1,400 difference based on our calculations. What changes in that throughout the year as the train takes off on October 1st is something that we do our best to project, but maybe we have higher consumption from individuals that is driving higher amounts.
And it wasn't that long ago, and Shane probably remembers this, when we were in flooding conditions.
Right.
We were buying way more water than we were using, and we were experiencing very different problems that we were trying to solve because of the amount of rain that we were having. So it's cyclical. Yeah.
If I could just add, other part of that equation is not just the consumption and use of water by our residents and businesses, but it's also the stormwater and the management of the sewer and, all the sewage and waste that's treated by the Trinity River Authority. And at some of my meetings I had with them last year, when I was the liaison for that, it was very clear, while they talked about they were proud they had not increased rates to North Texas community, reading between the lines, it was like, well, they're kind of holding back. But
Right.
at some point, they're going to have to increase rates because of just wear and tear, et cetera. And one big factor, let's not forget, is February of 2021 when we had the deep freeze. So Texas is not always hot.
Right.
And that affected the entire state. And if, we all recall, there were communities and not little rinky-dink ones around the state that did not have potable water for, I think, a week or more. And that did not affect North Texas. And Trinity River Authority talked about that and everything. They're planning, how they managed the crisis, kept a lot of their equipment moving and operating in those sub-zero temperatures, et cetera. But it was very clear that their costs were going to go up. And
Right.
this is well over a year ago. They talked about the cost of chlorine, a lot of the ingredients they have to use with the waste treatment facilities. And it, like I said, it was clear they were holding last year.
Right.
And so climate and weather are very big factors in this equation
Absolutely.
as well.
Just like we are sitting around and we're looking at this and considering how we invest in our infrastructure, how we make sure that we take care of the infrastructure that is within our care, they are, the organizations that provide us those services are doing the same thing. And their infrastructure is a whole lot more expensive than ours. And so what ends up happening either now or in the future is those rates are passed along that enable them to be able to upgrade and make sure that they can provide us what we need from a water sewer perspective. As a sidebar, there's a water treatment plant over in Carrollton that is one of the most fascinating things I've ever had a chance to do, is to really understand how the water gets to you. So if you are ever interested in that, I know people. I can maybe help get you a little tour.
Councilmember Rowland, I'm going to let you
And
finish.
Thank you. And then the other concern, I just wanted to reiterate what I've stated during the budget retreat, that I feel like the rebate is disproportionately being given to individuals. As a tax rate, it always varies depending on the market value of a home, whereas this rate is not being credited in the same way. And so when you really look at the numbers, people who are under that average are being given an amount larger than they normally would get in an actual decrease in taxes, whereas people whose houses are above that average, the higher you go, it's essentially a wealth distribution. And so I had some pretty deep concerns about that as well, just because one of the things that I try to make sure that I do and promote is treat everybody equally, regardless of identifying factors, particularly income. And so I just want to make sure that I'm not voting for something that would promote disproportional treatment. And so that was just something that I was concerned about, that I thought I'd bring up. And while on the subject of disproportional treatment, I don't feel right about just giving residents a tax or a rebate in the water bill and excluding the businesses. I think they've invested very heavily in our community, and I think we should respect that as well. So I hate to be the one to throw a wrench in things, I really do, but at the end of the day, I was elected to bring forth the concerns that I'm hearing, And I have a feeling that the more people I talk to, it's just going to compound.
Yeah. And this is a matter for, our role is to put forth an idea, and we've done that. And so that's why I started off this whole little discussion with, I'm interested in hearing what the body is more interested in doing and the direction that the body is interested in taking. But one component that I want to add to that, because I've had some conversations, and as I hear things, I'm like, well, is it, the way my mind is wired, I constantly am trying to figure out what is the fact? Let me figure out what exactly the data shows. What is the data telling me? And so we selected an amount that the fund could withstand. So that's, why we looked at what the bill rate was, et cetera, and we selected an amount that would not, for lack of a better way of saying it, bankrupt or put us below our target amounts within that particular fund. And when we looked at, based on the average value, and you have to, there's going to be larger amounts and lesser amounts. We looked at what the average value was of a water bill, and some people are going to pay more and some people are going to pay less because of some of the factors that we talked about. Some people water more or less. Some people have better, more energy efficient products in their homes. Some people don't. Those are a couple things that come to mind. So I went to look at, well, on average, the 327, we use that number to calc out how much that would equate for that particular property owner that owned at that average, and that's how we came to that approximate 5 cent. Then I started, well, let me slice it like this, and let me look at it like this. I also took a look at like our senior community. Because I'm thinking through the lens of what I hear when people are having trouble making payments, et cetera, and the types of people within our community who need help and who this help would benefit. I started looking at, well, what is the break-even point for our seniors within the community? Because again, remember, the seniors have the benefit of the larger tax exemption that you all worked so quickly to be able to implement. And so that break-even point for seniors is somewhere around $425, $450. Let me state it in a sentence form. So a senior, because of additional exemptions, et cetera, if their property is, and I wish I had looked at it, let's say 425, okay? But I have it specifically at my desk. Let's say 425. At 425,000, that's where it starts to get to be where you would get the tax deduction that you would receive for a 5 cent reduction starts to be the same as the water rate reduction. So what I'm saying is that our average is 327. There's a lot of room in between 327 and 425 to enable our seniors to get even greater benefit from this particular idea versus a reduction, a tax rate reduction. So I'll share that, and then if y'all have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, but I'm listening. Okay?
Thank you. Councilmember Roman, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Driscoll, I know you had something else you wanted to add after that.
Well, we're jumping around a bit, I guess. I just wanted to add that talking about, how the environment and climate affects things, at one of the presentations I attended at Trinity River Authority last year, they talked about one of their big expenses that was unanticipated was actually a sinkhole in Farmers Branch that was north of 635, and I didn't know about this. I learned this at the meeting, and they talked about the cost involved, and I believe it shut down the access road on 635, and they talked about getting the call in the middle of the night and sending out their crews, and I don't know if that affected Mr. Bentley and Public Works, but it was just an example of unanticipated costs and things like that. And they did have reserves, and they got it taken care of quite quickly. But again, it was a small kind of environmental disaster. Luckily, it didn't happen under 635. But there's just a lot of unanticipated things that we can't really forecast. And also looking in the rearview mirror, well, you know, we have these funds, we're not going to need them, it's going to go la 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 like it has. We never know that. We just don't know that.
Councilmember Merritt.
Yes, thank you. As Mr. Driscoll said, with the TRA, they just approved their budget in the last week while we were here. So they just approved an increase in funds. They are also having to deal with infrastructure and accommodating the growth that is occurring in North Texas, as we all know that is happening as well. So we do expect to see those fees, you know, trickle their way through the enterprise. I want to make sure that we understand this perception of everyone is giving a discount, a rate reduction. That is a perception, but it's not the fact. My own sampling of those budgets of 8 other communities that seem to be the breadbasket of North Texas that we compare ourselves to, our friends in Carrollton are not changing their budget rate, their property tax rate. One that often gets referred to, our friends in University Park are changing theirs. I'm sorry, it's Highland Park that is not changing theirs as well. Their average, you know, price home is 1.6 million. University Park is 2.0 million. So we have a different, to Sherelle's point, there are different factors going on. Our friends in Capel, as we know, are dropping theirs, but we also saw in the budget retreat, they have a general fund balance in excess of $135 million, which almost hits our, well, actually it's more than our operating budget for the year. So these factors are totally different, and we have to weigh these things out. The city is also incurring, you know, greater cost impacts as well. We heard Chief Latimer talk about the price of a fire truck. The prices of ambulances are up 20, 30%. Richard, you talked about Richardson. Richardson, in their own material for this budget cycle, showed that ambulances were going up about 30%. So we're encountering increased costs in operating the city. And we have to be prudent, and we have to not spend frivolously. I understand that. And what one person feels is frivolous is not frivolous to someone else. And we have to balance that off. So disproportionate, you know, is very a timely issue to weigh these things out. We have to provide the services that our community expects, the high level of service, you know, the short response time for both police and fire, the number of firemen that are on the shifts, the number of police officers that are on patrol. We're glancing over the code enforcement issue as well, because we hear as much as they are being asked and tasked to do, they don't have the staff to do it. And so I want us to be mindful. There are going to be some terse conversations here. I hope we're all prepared for that. I grew up in Arkansas. I have thick skin. I've heard every joke. My last name is Merritt. I have a merit badge for that. I've heard them all. I understand that the budget seems to be growing, and it's largest that we've ever had. Well, guess what? The Merritt family budget is the biggest budget we've ever had, too, in my entire lifetime. My father and grandfather would just, you know, can't comprehend the amount of income that we have. All right? There are others that experience this as well. But we also have to know that we live in a community where there are others that are struggling, and we have to provide that same level of service to the lowest and to the highest. We just do. Those are tough conversations. And so I just want us to make sure that when we have these conversations, and you're entitled to your opinion, but I will tell you, you're not entitled to your own facts. And so the facts can be twisted. My statistics teacher in college, professor told me, you can make numbers sing and do any dance you want them to. And we need to make sure that we understand what we're talking about and not propose or communicate facts that are not necessarily accurate. And I think that's something that we have an onus to do sitting up here. And we're working with staff, our peers up here. We hear it from the community. But this is tough business, folks. And we don't want to minimize the level of services that we provide. And if we start ratcheting things down, we're going to have to give stuff up. We have just to be aware of that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Merritt. Councilmember Williams?
I just want to speak to that idea of equity and equality when it comes to taxes. I also had a really great economics teacher, and when you're looking at, and to speak to your point that you can make numbers seem like a lot of different things, when you're looking at a home value, when we're taxing someone on the value of their home, and when we're talking about giving relief to the community, as a percentage of somebody's income, those in our communities that own homes below that, is it 327? That 327 level, if you look at how much they pay in taxes across the board as a percentage of their income, they pay a higher rate. And so when we're looking at giving somebody a relief where it's a flat amount across the board, where it may not seem like it's that much, it's not as impactful for those who have homes valued at over $500,000 or over $700,000. You can't have that conversation about taxes without also taking into account that those that live in those homes below 327 pay more as a percentage of their income than those above. That's how our tax code works. So when we're looking at times of trouble, in times of economic distress, it's usually those people who are have a greater impact. They are having a greater impact in the economy. When we're talking about inflation, as a percentage of their income, they're struggling more. And so as a community member and as a business person in this community, because I will tell you, I pay our property taxes on my business. That $134, if you gave me a 5-cent decrease, that is not going to allow me to invest in any more employees. That's not going to allow me to invest in any measurable way that's going to have a big impact on me. But for someone who makes a teacher, who makes $40,000, $45,000 a year, that's going to have a greater impact for them than what it is on my business. So I just want us to be cognizant when we talk about, that's why, Sherelle, I love it when you gave us that dollar. That's my favorite thing ever. I love that dollar. The amount of property taxes that we pay that actually go to the city is very small. A decrease in the city's tax rate has a very little impact when you're talking about a 5-cent decrease for businesses. It's not going to allow me to hire another employee. It's not going to allow me. Maybe it helps me with my water bill that month a little bit, but that's about it. So I would gladly give up that $134 if it had a greater impact on the community as a whole, and it might. So maybe I have a patient that was going to have a copay of $134 on a filling that they can now afford because they got that water rate decrease. So I just want us to be cognizant when we're talking about those numbers. They have a huge impact. At 75% or 73% of our tax base is commercial. I also want to be responsible to them, and I don't think there's anyone on this council that's not trying to be responsible to them. But $200 or $300 over the course of a year is not going to allow me to invest anything in that business. Us losing $4 million out of our city budget, that's impactful.
So, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I just wanted to address 2 points. When I look at administering a city budget, I don't consider people's income. I think our responsibility is to consider people's property values and the tax rate that we set, because those two things is what makes up what people are going to be paying out of their pocket. And, for a living, what I do is I'm a financial planner. I prepare tax returns, and I can tell you that your statement about the people who are in the lower income paying the most is inaccurate, because there are several different I don't want to get into all of that, but I can tell you that that's inaccurate. And so, I understand that we need to make sure we're helping people in need, and that's why we have some of those programs in place to be able to give back to those individuals. But when it comes to setting the tax rate, I don't know that I would be considering people's necessarily financial situation and generalize that. I would base it off of people's contribution to the tax base and how much they're going to be getting back. That's kind of how the only fair way to look at it in my eyes.
My only response to that would be that we're not increasing the tax rate. We're proposing that it be left the same. So in order to balance a budget, we have set expenses, and the fact that we're doing the water reduction versus just saying we're just gonna leave the tax rate alone this year was to offer relief to those that need relief when we're looking at larger inflation. And I think as council members and as community members, to not take in all factors and just look at property tax rates in a vacuum is irresponsible.
I understand where you're coming from, and there was something you said, and I want to be careful about addressing it. I just want to make sure that whatever we're doing for somebody is being given back to everybody in an equal way that is meaningful to every single person. And that's really it. And I think we are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I'm looking at people that elected me and have faith in me to represent their voices, and this is what I'm doing. I have a lot of unhappy people, and there is, maybe I'll have a town hall, and maybe, Sherelle, we can team up together and we can try to combat this together. I don't know if you want to deal with angry residents, but I have a lot of angry residents, and understandably so. And, when you look at the first page of the budget, while we are keeping the tax rate the same, it very clearly states in there that our taxes are increasing by almost 17%.
And
So, overall, the valuations have increased by, I think my number was 16% within my slide. I feel like I should get tattoos of the slides on my arm, because it's like all these random facts and stats are swirling around in my head. But bear this in mind. I showed you, and I might be able to get back to it pretty quickly, residential values across our area. We're not special in that respect, have increased quite a bit. Don't lose sight of the fact that those properties that have increases greater than 10% are capped. So as we're looking at, oh, a 16%, oh, 20% residential, bear in mind that the increase on residential properties in any given year is capped at 10%. Okay? Just coming with facts. Bye.
As a different kind of point of view, is Coppell was brought up, is a city that's reducing their tax rate. They're in a much different situation, not only because they're sitting on a healthy stockpile of cash, but they're not a Dart city. Could you imagine if we had $18 extra million to play with every year? We could cut our tax rate in half because for so many years we've had to live within ourselves to maintain our police and fire, to find creative ways to bring economic development into the city, that these other communities that aren't one of the 13 Dart cities, they have all this excess funds that they get to play with to pad their numbers and for their tax rate to still be relatively close to ours. I think we've done an amazing job. And when you talk about disproportionate share of who gets what, it was in less than a month and a half ago that we just gave a 4.5 cent tax rate decrease to our individuals over 65 in this community. That is something that I'm not benefiting from, but we recognize that these individuals are on fixed incomes. It's harder to probably live with inflation, so how do we give some money back to them to offset that is technically coming off of everyone that's sitting here at the table? Because I don't think anyone, are you 65? I don't want to call you out, but let's assume he's not. We're all under, and so that was something we all decided to do together that didn't impact any of us, to give back to a community and segment of our community that needed that. And one other point as it relates to Coppell, and you might know this because you do numbers better than I do, but Coppell's homestead's 5%. So a $327,000 home in Coppell, at their tax rate, I think when I did the numbers, because we have a 20% homestead exemption, you're going to pay $1,540 here. Even with the 5-cent tax rate decrease, which I think is what they're proposing over in Coppell, at their rates are still paying $120 more a year than we are on their taxes. So it is still more expensive to live in Coppell, even with their lower rate, even with an added cent in extra revenue that we don't get. And so the services that we provide, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to plan for, keeping the rate the same was a hard decision to make because so many people want some money back. How do we do that? But also, how do we protect future councils to give them the most amount of opportunity to make decisions that are going to put our city in a situation for success with the rising cost of capital improvements, other things? And is there a more creative way to effectively get to the same goal while still allowing us an opportunity to succeed long term? And that was the driving force behind a lot of this. And I know there's some things that are up in the air that we need to continue. Thank you for finding that $1.09 million that we can discuss about some other things that you want to see that help protect us long term, moving to 20-year. Are we increasing pay for police and fire further than what we're already anticipating doing? What else are we doing to spend money? And a lot of that's possible because of this budget, because of the rate. But when you look at the net cost to live in Farmers Branch at $327,000 on an average compared to other cities, this is still a great deal. And I think people need to be mindful of that. And like I said, it comes with hard decisions. Merritt, you characterized it very well. It's hard to think about what else are we going to do, but what does this mean? I know for a fact that SB2 going forward, I won't be here, but you're going to have to cut the rate every single year going forward, or you're going to have to ask every single one of us in the community to come to the table and say, nope, you can raise it because we need more to cover some of that. You know what, if things shake out a little bit better and drop it, I think that it's prudent for us as a council to look at this as this is a benchmark, this is a floor, this is still relatively low compared to all of our neighbors based on what people are actually paying, that this sets us up long-term despite some of the obstacles that we have with the way that we fund this city. Because, like I said, there's 13 of us that lose a cent, and we watch all the great things that all the communities north of us and to the west and to the east, what they get to do with this extra funds that we would like to do. But we have an amazing staff, an amazing team that come up with creative solutions year in, year out to keep this budget low, to make sure that we have top-notch facilities, top-notch equipment, top-notch just departments across the board to deliver services to this community. And I really think that doing it this way, well, is it the best solution? No, but I think it's a pretty damn good one. And I will stand behind that. So the only thing that I think that, if I'll let you weigh in a second, but one of the things that we need to discuss is Sherelle presented us with some options to deliver on some things that we discussed last week that we wanted to see. And I think some of those conversations need to happen here. We need to get some kind of clarity. So when we come to the table, it's not last minute changes in the budget. You know, if we have to, we will. If we need other meetings, we will have other meetings to make sure that everything gets dialed in and nailed down. But that's kind of the point of some of this discussion, is clear the air on some of that, make sure we're moving in a path that gets us towards a final budget and something that we can bring forward to the community and actually vote on. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. Farmers Branch is an excellent value compared to many, if not most, of the rest of the cities around us. The location is one thing we can't change, and I wouldn't change it if we could. It's an excellent location. I've often explained to friends, we're sitting on gold, right? The dirt under my house is gold. So I totally agree with that statement. Just to sort of give some summary input or insight with a lot of the detail that's been discussed. You know, if we lowered the tax rate 5 cents, my house is pretty average, pretty close to average. The $131 savings in my city tax rate is not something that my wife and I are going to go celebrate. It doesn't make a big difference to us. Likewise, $132 over a year's period, $11 a month in my water bill is not something that I'm even going to notice, probably because I'm on auto pay with that, but
Thank you for that.
it's not a big amount of money, right? At least to me, it's not. And I realize to some people it is. But I think part of the bigger perspective here is how we spend it. And we need to think about the optics around that. No, we're not increasing the tax rate. That's a good thing. We are going to be paying more in property taxes. Nobody likes that, but it's a reality. But what the residents see us as a council focused on is imperative in this discussion. And I'm expecting we're going to hear from some residents tonight, and I just want to encourage us all, and I know that we do, to listen with a very open mind to some of that feedback, because what we spend our extra money on, and I hate phrasing it like that, but that's just the way it came out, is going to be really important as to how our residents view the job that we as council are doing through this process.
Does anyone else have any other comments at this time? I'll bring it back up. I don't know if we want to step back and think about the option 1, option 2, additional funding that we all need to evaluate on how we want to potentially modify this budget. I think Sherelle would appreciate if we could provide some level of clarity and direction today on that. And so I would love to be able to pass that along, because when we come back at our next meeting, I think it's going to, you know, give us a better framework of starting point of narrowing down, okay, this is what we're going to do, because, you know, tonight we're setting our maximum rate, which, you know, I think if I'm reading the tea leaves, we don't want to go any higher than what our current rate is.
Correct.
Even though the maximum rate means nothing. It's just as high as we can go, but setting it right there, it'll never be higher than what it is now. So the only place it can go is down. But, you know, the next 2 meetings, that's more public discussion. I think we have to take some action at the next meeting, and then.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, in our next meeting, remember, we're layering in year-end amended budget. So we'll have some time to revisit this upcoming year's budget, but, you know, we also, unless you don't want to discuss that, we also will need to spend some time going through that as well, so.
We'll have time before the meeting again dedicated solely to this item, but I just want to see if anyone has any comments or, you know, their feelings on what our possibilities are to cover some of the topics that multiple council members said they wanted to see potentially addressed within this budget going forward. Councilmember Jackson.
Mayor, I would like us to explore that area in the water sewer, in the meter area, to see if there is some wiggle room in that $3 million, the 2.7 we're at now. Because my understanding was we had 1.8 residential, thank you, Dave.
1.2, or,
To commercial, and that the commercial was not critical right now, but that is a can that, I don't like to use that phrase, but again, it just came out. We could potentially kick down the road to another budget or the next budget.
so in what way would you like for me to explore the 1.2? What are you looking for?
We could cut it in half, and that gives us
So-
600,000.
Okay, so in lieu of, well, bear in mind that one of these options that I'm proposing would pull some amount of money from that anyway, you know?
300,000.
Yeah, so I guess what I need in terms of direction is listed in the request for additional funding. Do we want to do all of these, some of these to some extent, et cetera, because that becomes the answer for how much of this 690 we use, how much of this additional funding source we use, et cetera. And then that gets to the question that you raised, Councilmember Jackson, about how much would be remaining to either be done or not done with respect to the commercial meters. So I kind of need an answer, an understanding about those tweaks or changes to the budget. Okay, I'm going to listen.
Yeah, thank you. If there's a few moments of silence, just bear with us. The hamster's back on the wheel up here, so. Councilmember Williams.
With the 100,000 coming from the monument signs, what exactly was in those plans?
Midway.
Midway is, if you drive down Midway
Yep.
blades are up. We don't have the light kits in yet, but that's up. The Josie Lane blade that was hit, we've now have an insurance claim settlement, so we were able to take it down. We'll get that one replaced. The next intersection, I believe, was LBJ and Luna.
Okay,
Was
so
next on the list.
LBJ and Luna is what
That would be, we would forego that in this budget year.
Okay, okay. And then Sherelle, just so that we have clarification, the 3.3, we're just taking out a fund balance in the general fund, our surplus.
Yes, so the general fund
Where does
has,
that put us in our percentage-wise? Because I know we like to.
we would be over our target still.
Okay.
Because basically, we had initially put an amount of $4 million, and that had us coming down to, can't see, so, 18.3, which our target was 14.8, you know, and that target is going to fluctuate based on percentages of expenditures, et cetera, which is the way the general fund is raised. So using 3.3 instead of 4 better positions general fund, and it,
Okay.
yeah.
Perfect.
I have an elementary question for you. I'm looking at the summaries, the combined summaries, and what is the difference, oh yeah, Exhibit I, the difference between the combined summary and the most realistic combined summary? I noticed some movement in some of the numbers, but just,
Yeah, so most realistic removes about $500,000 of expenditures on general fund, because what the presumption is on the most realistic basis is that there may be, delays in starting a project, or timing of hires, a number of factors that may cause the expenditures not to be as high. So we cast that in two ways. We cast it pure, and we cast it to kind of think through what might happen if, when the whistle blows October 1st, everybody, look, all of them start getting to work on the plans, but some of those may encounter delays, et cetera, so.
and so the most realistic gives us an extra million in our fund balance for general funds from 18.3 to 19.3.
Let me.
Should I be following the most realistic one?
Maybe let me explain it here as well. You're seeing an additional million because the top part of the page that starts with the fund balance from September 30th, 2021, and it starts walking it down. During some of our conversations at the budget retreat, I explained, and don't mind reviewing it, the section that talks about estimated expenditures and estimated revenue for 2021-22, that's what we're going to be updating when we come back together. So what'll happen is we no longer guess at that number, you see? So 500 will come out of it in terms of the 21-22, because we'll be way more realistic than guessing at 500,000 swing, you see? So the reason you see $1 million different is because 500 is baked into both this year and the next year. When we true that up for you, and the next time we get together on September 2nd, that number will be closer to what we believe it to be when the train station, when we reach September 30th at the train station of life.
The other thing that I'd like to get some insight on, and we may ask this question, well, no, probably not tonight, but the fund balance targets at the bottom of that summary. We know that general fund is 15 to 20%. Today, or 9/30, we're expecting to be at roughly 30%. How's that not right?
Which balance are you using? Are you using the $19 million balance?
No, I'm using the 21.3 in the middle of the page. It says estimated fund balance of 21.3.
Right, but you gotta,
But you have to do the math in order to get
Microphone.
to 19 million. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Or if you're doing the most realistic one, that is 18,334,000. That calculates at 24.65%.
and let me add this in as well.
I'm sorry. Go up to the end of this year, not the end of next year. The end of, at 9/30/2022. Right here.
It shows 21.321.
That is 30,
But you're also,
Let's review.
okay?
yeah, but you also
So-
look, you've got deductions of $4 million that we were talking about. This is the TMRS number, what we've adjusted. So there's a lot of flux in this.
Understood. That's beyond 9/30/2022. That's the new fiscal year, right? So the 4 million is in the new fiscal year. I'm just saying at 9/30, this is where we land.
Hold on.
Two things.
Yeah, I'm going to let Sherelle.
Two things. Number one, general fund is a percentage of expenditures.
Right.
Number two, these expenditures are not trued up, okay? So just as we talked about just a moment ago, when you get, what you have before you for 21-22 is the budget. It's not real life. When you get when we get back together again, what you will have, that number that flows within the 21, 22 section of this whole schedule is going to change. And it's going to change based on a couple of things. What we know actuals to be, because we have a lot of actuals behind us, and our departments are providing our finance team with what a shorter projection will be. You know, we're projecting just another month or so, et cetera, right?
Refining it.
Right. So what I want to caution against is picking that $21 million number because, one, the number isn't fully baked, and two, your target is going to be different because it is a function of expenditures.
Right.
So the reason we walk it all the way down the page is because what we're calculating, that 14 million and that 11 million, is a function of the estimated expenditures for 22, 23. It's going to be, if we were to do that again in a different way, it would be a different number for 21, 22.
Right.
Okay.
So that 18.3 million that we're coming to at 9/30/2023 is in addition to the 1.7 next to it in the fixed asset fund and the 2.4 and the 1.5 and the other funds. Those are
All,
all
yeah,
additional?
all of our, we maintain several dozen funds. These are the main players where the main dollar amounts reside. We reviewed all of where the money is in the course of our budget retreat, and it's included in the book. Each one of these main funds has a target. And so the reason we present this schedule is to kind of tie it all together and show you for each of those big movers and shaker type funds, what those targets are and where we project those amounts to be at the end of when we are getting together doing the budget next year.
right, right.
Okay.
So for example, the fixed asset fund, we don't want the estimated fund balance at 9/30/23 to be any less than 300,000, right? That's what the target means.
We would prefer for it
Okay.
to be that amount.
But
That's the stated amount.
We're projecting that to be 1.7 million. So it's quite a bit more over our target. And the same goes, or the same holds true across the board for all of those fund balances. And I just wonder, why are we overshooting? I get if we want to save more than not enough, but across the board, we're substantially overshooting our target numbers. And I
Why?
just wonder why.
Okay. I heard in our conversation today from you, well, what happens if you get commercial meters that break, et cetera? So Mark holds an amount of money, but what happens if he runs into more of those commercial meters that break, or something happens with an engine or a fire truck, et cetera? So those things get purchased out of that fixed asset fund. We would prefer to have a situation where we're not operating without a safety net. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece is, in terms of my thoughts around fund balance, et cetera, is that some of these amounts, I think about hotel motel fund. Our target, I think at the time that the pandemic hit, I think that targeted amount was like 300,000. And if that fund was not sitting with a little more than $1.1 million, we would have had to make some major catastrophic type changes with respect to what we do to encourage tourism within the city. So, but for that balance being above the target, we would have had to make major changes. That caused us to think through what that target should be, increase it a bit more, and so that's a factor in why those numbers tend to overshoot the target. The third thing I wanted to add is I think about the form, that slide that Marty came and presented that showed us all the makeup of how we are evaluated when we stand before regulating agencies trying to upgrade our thing. So they don't necessarily look at, are you just barely able to meet your target, et cetera. Anything that we're able to do to maintain our city, to maintain levels of service, to provide infrastructure, but also have something additional, that is helpful. That is helpful. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that they're like, ooh, you have $2 million or $4 million more than your target, so that's like bonus points. I mean, as she shared during her presentation, none of us exactly know how and whether those ratings, those factors have changed in how they rate, but having something in excess of what your target is extremely helpful in that respect as well. So I share those three pieces in terms of thoughts around fund balance.
Okay, thank you. And I understand, I do. It's better to have a little more than not enough. I've got to think, and you used the word safety net, that there was some methodology or norm that was used in determining for Farmers Branch and the assets that we have, our fixed asset fund target should be 300,000 as opposed to 600,000 or $1 million. Same goes for sewer water. That one's pretty close. But the hotel motel fund, and I get it. Having a lot of extra money in that fund when COVID hit was a big help. So I would call that lucky. Probably a lot of cities weren't that lucky. But we wouldn't have been alone had we been managing that fund's balance closer to target. And that's where I'm just having some, I'm just having some confusion perhaps about why so much, because if we look at it across the board, we're at the end of this year, this fiscal year, among all of those, if the targets are the same, we're holding an extra 11.3 million. If we get to the end of next year, we're holding an extra 7.5 million. And it just seems like a lot of extra money sitting there.
I've provided some thoughts.
Understand.
Okay,
Maybe
so
we need to
I'm not
relook at
sure.
our targets.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to relook at our targets because I don't know how long it's been since we've.
And that's
updated them.
possible. That's
Maybe
possible.
our targets aren't right. Maybe that 300,000 in fixed asset fund needs to be 500, 600, $1 million. That would make more sense to me in accordance with the fund balances that we're expecting based on unbaked numbers to end up at in a year and a couple of months.
We'll take that in as well.
These are great conversations.
Yeah,
And I
we'll
think
take that in.
one of the things in the fixed asset fund, I think that we've heard is the rising cost of fire trucks, ambulances, and so forth, that they're going up 20%. And so some of that those are for future purchases. So that fund builds up. It's not, this is how much you have and you spend it all. Those are built up over years for planned purchases. And I don't know, I see Tom and Kevin, I think we have a fire engine that's not too far from being replaced 2-3 years from now that we're trying to save up for. And that's one reason I think you'll see that fund building up is for that. Maybe we can do some level of a presentation to kind of show a forecast of when some of these larger purchases hit, which is why that fund is building up over target balance.
Okay. That to me makes a lot of sense in the fixed fund, asset or fixed asset fund. Yeah.
And fund balances can be revisited because a few years ago, council thought that the water sewer fund for I&I was definitely low. And so we made it a priority to build it up above a certain level and beyond, just because it has been noted in these presentations, 50% are going to need to be repaired. And so it was a priority for us then to say, get those up there, much like in previous years. We added money to, we had more money for streets and stuff for Mark as well to make sure that we could get levels up that,
Right.
it's for future stuff. And so we can always revisit maximums, minimums. And that's a conversation
It's a whole lot better. It's a whole lot better conversation to have with S&P and those who rate us, that where our balances are above the target and why and what types of planned things are we doing with the target, the excess, as opposed to, hey, you got this target and you don't even have that much in there. So this is a much better conversation. It shows the health, the financial health of the organization. That's a factor that people who look at all sorts of cities and all sorts of, other jurisdictions, that's one of the factors in the financial health. Can you do what you need to do and still and take care of your infrastructure and still have something in the tank to handle some pay-go? I get questions about that a lot when we're having these meetings. What are you doing with your own money that you have the wherewithal to put to the side to handle infrastructure? Can you do it yourself without every single time something big needs to be done that we have to issue debt? They look at that.
Right, agreed.
But we can't do that if there's no balance. You
Right,
see?
and maybe it's something as simple as a footnote that says this balance minimum is 300,000, but we're building the fund balance to fund future asset purchases or a fire truck or something like that. Because as an average citizen looking at this, it just looks to me like a whole lot of extra money sitting around.
Yeah, and and I'm not going to take you through the tour of the book, but there is a section where we outline what planned purchases are from a fixed asset perspective.
If you look in the indexes in the back, there's typically an outlay 10 years out that says we're going to spend this here, then
Yeah.
and there. And so there is some level of plan out there in terms of what it looks like, but I haven't looked at it closely this year
Okay.
to give you numbers that would make sense. But
Wait. I need direction. I'm going to go sit and listen again. I don't know what to do when I see you again. What do you want to see? We're going to do tweak the CIP on water meters. I heard that. Okay.
I guess I'll kick this off. So everyone just keeps looking this way. So, if I had to choose the options here to best allocate this to accomplish the request for additional funding that has been brought up, I would say no to scrapping the monument signs. I would say if we need to take some money out of the smart meter, I would say just a little bit more. Don't want to deplete the whole thing. I'd like to give Mark an opportunity to get more of the commercial sector done as well, just to move everyone to the same level. And then on the option 2, allocating some across the different categories of where the costs come from, I think is probably more of a better approach. And so when I look at the ways to spend, what I was kind of leaning towards on this, it's about, we might not have to take majority of it from the smart meter, but $230 for Metro Crest, 2% raise to public safety, which is $366,000. Upping the neighborhood investment program to $200,000. Neighborhood repair program, keep that $100,000. That's essentially a total of $900,000. And those would be the things that I think I could advocate for at this time. I think with our contracts for services from our partnerships, for the most part, all of them are on 3-year contracts that are expiring next year. I think we need to wait and see how all of those contracts play out, what those true metrics are, who delivered on what, and reevaluate them at that time. But at this point, to keep the status quo and to keep the course on those. But I think that puts more money into neighborhoods. That definitely makes sure that we have enough money for the repair programs and some of those things. It's definitely a bigger increase in police and fire, which I've heard here, and accomplishes the Metro Crest services stuff, but it's all within funds that we're going to reallocate in some level. I would let Sherelle kind of tweak the numbers down to get there, but I think that solves some of these problems, but what I would advocate for at this point.
So Mayor, just a question, just to make sure I'm clear on the public safety pay increase, you said 2% at $360,000 more. So that's beyond the current 7% that's
That would
been
take it to 9.
budgeted. It would take it to 9. Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Beasley, to the microphone.
Mayor and Council, good evening. Director of HR, Brian Beasley. Want to get clarity because I have to build structures and build that format and then understand if this is a one-time lump sum as we've talked about, or is it base pay increases? If it's base pay increases, that changes the actual physical structure. It's year over year, and you're building an additional cost to taxpayers ongoing. If it's a lump sum, I do not change the structures at all. Those individuals, our police and fire, will get that in the first pay period of October. And so they'll see a very large increase because instead of it being spread out over 26 pay periods, they'll get it one time. So they'll get a bigger bang for the buck if it is done as a lump sum. So that helps give me an HR direction as well as finance. So,
Councilmember Williams.
Wait. Right. So in our budget at the 107, the 107%, that is a build-in, right? That is a change in structure in our
yes,
pay.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So I personally, I agree with you. The 107, because that was advised by you and by staff, and that was a term that you and Chief Hale came to, I would feel comfortable with accepting that. And then if it's council's prerogative to want to do it an additional as a one-time lump sum, I'd agree to that. And that way we're not putting that strain on future budgets.
Sure. And just as a quick clarification, obviously you can come back each year and make a modification if you so choose to do another lump sum. So.
Councilmember Jackson.
So help me understand, if we give fire and police this year a 9% raise, we're required to give them a 9% raise next year?
So if you choose as a council to put that into base pay, then the answer is yes, sir. You won't give them another 9% increase necessarily. You might give them a 4, you might give them a 5, whatever the market data supports, but you've raised their base level
Right.
versus giving them a base increase of 7%, which is above and beyond the market. We've validated that. We want to do that. We want to do the best by our employees. You, Councilman, noted that our employees are our greatest asset across the board. As an HR guy, I'm going to completely agree with that. And they are, and our police and fire do an outstanding job, so I want to fight for them as much as possible. I think it's financially responsible, though, to not have a taxpayer burden year over year, built-in base at 9%. I'd rather build their base 7% and give them a one-time lump sum pop of 2 extra percent is what I'm asking for clarification on. It's not that you would necessarily next year come back, if the market dives, you may come back and say there's 0% across for everybody, and that's what we would do. We have never done that, by the way, even during COVID, where we did not give raises to merit folks, we still gave to public safety. We've had a history of doing that. It's a proud history of doing that. So we continue to do that. But no, sir, you're not obligated. It's just you're fixing your base level if you go up to the 9.
Understood, and I knew that, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear
Okay.
on sort of how that pay structure works.
Sure.
Are we putting any kind of retention provision in place with this one-time bump, or is it just here's your money, and so whoever wants to leave is going to leave, and that money leaves with them?
So I have a recommendation for that, but again, you all can direct us to do whatever you wish. My recommendation would be, if it is a lump sum, if it's base pay, they're going to get it over 26 pay periods.
Right.
But if it's a lump sum, I would probably split that in 2. I would split that at the beginning of the year so that the officers and fire department receive a nice increase in the first paycheck of October, I would come back at the end of the year and give that another time. In compensation design, it's very normal that you have key times to incentivize employees and pay employees. When you give lump sums, that's usually around the holidays because they want to pay off Christmas bills or they want to buy Christmas presents, or it's in the spring and summertime when they want to take vacations. So that also protects us because, yes, if somebody does decide to leave, it's less impactful to taxpayers.
Right. My whole focus is retention.
Yes.
Right? And so I think that's very important in this equation that we have this money stretched out over a period of time, no more than a year, but that's the whole purpose of going above and beyond what the market commands for these roles. Understanding right now, we don't know how long this is going to last, but
Correct.
we're in a war for talent, not just for fire and police, but for others as well. Mark pointed out last week, we got street people that can go work, well, not street people, but people that work in our streets.
Work on the streets, yes.
That could go and work on 35 for $10,000 more.
Yes, sir.
So as we go through this budget and we think about all these different roles and positions that are empty, that we're having trouble filling, just want to make sure we're thinking that through, that the retention aspect is firmly in place with whatever we pass. I'm okay with the additional 2 being paid in 2 halves over
Okay.
next year. I personally would prefer the raise because I don't think firemen and police pay is going to go down ever. And we're setting a bar in the Metroplex.
We are.
But if that's the compromise we make, that's still better than when we started.
And I will tell you that I look at this every year, and I would come to council every year. If the marketplace was saying 10%, much like Councilwoman Williams said, then I'm going to come back and say it's 10%, because I want to pay these guys and ladies the best we can, and they deserve that. So,
Anything else from anyone else at this time? Councilmember Roman.
So I know that the monument sign is one that is on Luna and 635, and I'm okay with foregoing that for a discussion at a future date. The public safety number, I'm okay with the 366. I don't have my mind made up on whether it's going to be a one-time or if it's just going to be a flat percentage increase just yet. But I think right now, for Sherelle's purposes, she's just looking at what we would support in terms of numbers for this proposed budget. So maybe we can revisit that at a later time. But and Mayor, did you say neighborhood investment in Sherrill's 200 or 100?
200,
Okay.
increasing it.
What would the additional 100 be for?
Neighborhood improvements. I mean, I've heard from many council members, can we put more money into our neighborhoods, whether that's sidewalks, lights, other things?
Okay.
And to accommodate 5 different council members, I would assume the money would need to go a little bit further than what it is to allow y'all to make more impacts in your neighborhoods, and that was my goal.
I just didn't know if there was a specific project, but I suppose that would be a discussion for a later time on what specifically we would support in the neighborhoods. So I'm okay with that as well, with the 200. And then for the neighborhood repair program, I'm also okay with the 100. And I'd like to also take advantage of that that note, Sherelle, that you have in there, the NPP, to add that on there for a total of 150 for 2 separate programs. And then I'd still like to advocate for some additional money. You know, I'm looking at the numbers, and I think without the monument signs, we're looking at, let's see, if we add up option 2 of 690 and then add in the 300 for reducing the smart meter fund, we're looking at 990. Hold on, I think I miscounted. Let's see, 690 plus the 790. I'd still like to see if there's a way to lump in some amount for the Chamber of Commerce. Just given the amount of contribution that they bring into the city, given that the revenue from businesses comes at a 75% contribution to our revenue, I just want to make sure that we're, even at a small amount, supporting our chamber's endeavors and supporting those businesses. I don't know what that amount may look like, but I'd still like to make sure that they're included.
All right. Councilmember Williams?
I would just say that we actually have two chambers, and I think it's a smarter idea when we look at our contracts, and we actually have metrics to, for them to bring us that says this is how we are impacting your businesses, and this is our contributions. I think that that's a more appropriate time to discuss than just throwing an amount at something, and especially if it's not shared equally across those entities, because that's I don't think that that's a good optic for those businesses in our city that are part of one chamber and not the other chamber, or vice versa. So I think it's probably a smarter idea for us to look at it once those contracts are up and we have metrics to actually compare it, and then we can say by data, this is the drive where the data shows, this, and this then justifies taxpayer dollars being allocated towards these chambers.
At what point do we look at, because from what I understand, the Farmers Branch Chamber of Commerce is on a performance-based contract. So they complete certain things and they receive the funding. How often are we reviewing those metrics? Is it quarterly, annually? When does that happen?
Here's Mr. Williamson to answer all these questions.
Ben Williamson, Assistant City Manager. So the reason for the performance-based contracts, several years ago, both chambers were given a lump sum contract. Here's your contract, go forth. There really wasn't any reporting back mechanism. So all the contracts for service moved to, once they show performance, then they invoice us based on those performance metrics. Both chambers share the same performance metrics. The FB Chamber and Metrocrest Chamber have the same goals. One is how many businesses are they visiting? So we're encouraging the behaviors to get out there and meet the businesses. The other part is any substantial information of meaning that can be shared with our economic development team, because the big decisions are coming back to you all, right, when it comes to retaining businesses and recruiting businesses. That's the job of economic development. The third piece and most important piece of their contract is memberships. The goal with the contracts is to make the chambers self-supporting to a degree to where if something happens here, they can self-support. So it heavily weights towards their ability to get new businesses to say, hey, I see value in what you do. We want to be part of this. The contracts do not include our membership or any events. So as you see value in the chamber, we are members of both. And any events they provide, you all have the option to attend on behalf of the city. So very much performance-based, very much encouraging the chambers to be self-sustaining, because that was something we found about 5 years ago. That may not have been the case, that the city was the only funding source at one point, essentially. And so it was trying to get more to, let's make this a business model that is self-sustaining. And we're fortunate to have an expert to help guide some of these conversations. John Land used to run the chamber, multiple chambers, so we know how to speak the chamber language and what drives chambers, and that's creating value for the business community. We are currently auditing both chambers right now, and so I have their aging reports, their balance sheets and everything as well. But they do report on a quarterly basis, and right now they're providing all their audit information.
So how long was the contract for each of them?
3 years. All social service contracts and the chamber contracts are on the same timeline.
And during those 3 years, how many times have each of them been audited for these?
They're required to report certain documents every year, but the invoices are their quarterly one where they report on what they've done. And then they also have to report to you as council. So for example, the chambers, when they came, they're going to talk about their new memberships, which is a key ability to drive how much revenue are they bringing in based on the value they're creating. Whereas the social service organizations present on the impact they've had in the social arena of Farmers Branch. So there's two feedback mechanisms there. The quarterly reporting, and then also the reporting to council, to where you get to talk to them about, hey, what's your impact on Farmers Branch been?
So we have, so if they do a presentation every quarter from the beginning of year one, from when we started funding them, that means we should have almost 3 years of data through their quarterly presentations to support whether they're providing value or not, right?
Quarterly invoices, annual reports, but also annual presentations to council. They don't present to you all every quarter, just once a year. Typically, it's been moved to where they actually start reporting later in the year so you can see how their performance has been in relation to the budget cycle.
Okay.
And also after elections as well, because the new council is sitting. So if there's changes, especially with all the contracts coming up for renewal next year.
So we do have some data to support whether or not they are doing what we have charged them to do with the money we've been providing them.
Absolutely. They're held accountable for the taxpayer dollars.
And so what have those presentations revealed about the way that they're using the money that we provided to them?
I can get you that information. I don't have it off the top of my head. And so part of that is reporting back from their auditor how the money they've earned has been spent into the chambers as well. But as we have those reports, we can make those available. And in the past, council members have requested their most recent reporting to us. They can see what the chambers are reporting.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like we have some data to make a decision on whether or not we should divert some funding to them, and $25,000 for a budget of this size is a drop in the bucket. So I don't know if there's maybe some data that we might be able to see to make that decision, because what I'm hearing is we don't really have that data, and we'd like to wait until the end of the contract to revisit whether we're going to fund them, but that would leave a fiscal year with kind of a gap. So
Can you get us kind of the data and metrics that we can review, and we'll talk about it at the next budget meeting?
Yeah.
Or the next council meeting? when we
We'll
talk
bring the
about
data
budget.
forward. Yes, we do have the data, and we can present that to you all as well, including their adherence to the contract. And then we can also validate everything that's been submitted to make sure the data is accurate for council as well. So we'll confirm everything is accurate and bring it for you all to consider.
yeah, no, and I appreciate that, and I think I'm a numbers person and data person, and I think if the numbers certainly suggest that they've been providing value to us, and I think we should continue to provide funding to them. So
Yeah. Can you provide that for both chambers, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. To give you some direction, let's earmark, is everyone cool with 990? 300 from meters, 690 out of option 2, which takes a little bit out of fund balance, and the rest out of their appropriate categories in terms of how staffing is spread across the budget?
yes.
Okay. All right. Well then, with that, I will say let's move on to A3, discuss future agenda items. Councilmember Roman?
I don't have anything at this time, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Driscoll?
No, I think we've got enough going on right now.
Councilmember Williams?
I'm good as well for now.
Councilmember Jackson?
None here.
Councilmember Merritt?
There's plenty of stuff on the docket. We'll wait. We can talk about many more things in the future. I'm good.
All right, well then I'll throw a wrinkle, and I think it might be something that needs to be talked about in the comprehensive plan, but as we consider the west side, it's just something I brought up in the past. I would still love to have a conversation about additional recreation facilities out there as well, instead of just the park. So talk about that, not after the budget, but, just want to put it out there so that it's on the top of mind, so. I know, I'm bringing it back up. Got to make sure it's there. All right, with that, we are going to go ahead and recess, go upstairs for executive session, which I will read in right now. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.072 of the Texas Government Code to discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or sale of real property north of Carrick, south of Valley View, east of I-35, west of Denton Drive. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.072 of the Texas Government Code to discuss the purchase, exchange, lease, or sale of real property north of Valley View, east of Josie Lane, west of Webb Chapel, south of Valwood Parkway. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code to seek legal advice from the city attorney regarding a matter involving confidential attorney-client communication and/or discuss pending or contemplated litigation. We will recess. The time is 5:14. Thank you.